an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't follow idle.
6:21 in Trinidad and Tobago, the Mighty Sparrow talking about education, as a prelude to our discussion with Antonio De Freitas at the helm of Ttuta, the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. But I suppose Ms. De Freitas, who will join us shortly, might have been cringing at the reference to being better off dead when it comes to education, because I suppose one, it was an era emphasizing the importance of education, but now in 2020 to use those references, because one of the lines is about being blockhead like a mule and so on, and being better off dead. It takes us back to a time when we were comfortable using that sort of invective, that sort of language, dunce and dotation and all that sort of thing. And now in an environment when we are supposed to be a little more enlightened, although you don't see that in the politics. I don't know how people like Keith Rowley and Kamala Prasad Bisesa and so on could believe that what they say on the platform can be separated for their attempt to be diplomatic and nice and so on afterwards. People don't operate that way. But again, we're talking about education this morning, and indeed, over 20,000 Standard 5 pupils will be writing the SEA examination, the much delayed SEA examination tomorrow under COVID-19 protocols. The Ministry of Education is reminding parents to adhere to the guidelines while dropping off students, and the Ministry of Health has cleared the 11 schools that were under quarantine following that period when there was certainly a heightened level of challenges faced because of the coronavirus. Well, is Ttuta satisfied? And what are their thoughts on the impending suspension of the first academic term for 2020-2021? What is the perspective on new Minister of Education, whoever that might be? The speculation from the Express is that it will be Dr. Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, who held the portfolio of culture in the previous PNM administration. But let's hear from Ms. De Freitas now. A very good morning to you, Ms. De Freitas. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Fazir. Good morning to viewers. Thank you for having me.
More than welcome. Good to have you once again, because you hold an important portfolio at the helm of the major labor organization representing teachers. Any concerns, given that we're 24 hours away from SEA? Any lingering concerns about anything associated with SEA?
Just the issue for zero sanitization in some schools. We know that the EBC was supposed to make provisions to have schools sanitized after the elections. The process has been ongoing, so we are hopeful that by today all of that will be done, and the principals and invigilators will be able to enter the compound tomorrow. They will have the scanning and so forth in place, and that our students would go in, and as you said, they would be calm, no extra pressure, and they would put their best foot forward. Ttuta wishes these students all the best tomorrow, please God.
Are you hoping that this could be, if not the last, one of the last times that we have the SEA?
Fazir, we are hoping that this is the opportunity to engage in the discussion on changing the way we do placement of students from primary to secondary. And if it means that we need to adjust the SEA and to find alternative mechanisms, well, we are looking forward to the opportunity to deal with that issue. The new Minister of Education, whoever he or she will be, has to understand that unlike what Sparrow sang so many years ago, children going to school now may not be in the same context that he meant all of those years back. Going to school will take a different connotation. Likewise, assessment will take on a different connotation. So we look forward to that discussion on the alternatives to the SEA and to other high-stakes assessments of that nature.
But is that discussion going to translate into anything? Because, and I alluded to it, the regular piece that is done by Ttuta on a Tuesday in the Newsday newspaper talking about recalibrating education. Well, you could put that headline back to when Sparrow was singing about education, because we've been talking about this recalibrating in a real sense. Do you think that's going to happen?
Fazir, this COVID pandemic has changed the way we look at many things. It has changed the way we do many things, education being one of them. So the recalibration of education has to not only come in terms of policies, policy development, and policy implementation, but also in terms of how we as citizens view things, our perceptions, our expectations. Recalibration of education will also involve the use of a different set of strategies and different tools to deliver education in this current environment. We don't know how long such a situation will last. So at the start, collaboration with the stakeholders and meaningful discussion, hearing what we have to say and what we have to propose, is the way for us to understand how we can recalibrate, how we can reset education in Trinidad and Tobago to make it meaningful. You know, the reference to the terms in the Calypso, Duncy and Blockhead and so forth, we have recognized for many years that all children can learn. It's just that children learn differently. So it means that in our thrust to continue with education in Trinidad and Tobago, we must cater for children of all needs and at all levels and of all learning styles. We can no longer try a one-size-fits-all, where 20 students sit in a classroom, 20 students of different abilities. We deliver the curriculum in the same way, with the same kind of resources, and expect the same results from all 20 students, even though they are of different emotional and social intelligences. These are some of the recalibrations that need to take place.
We'll get back to that in a moment, because I think that is the real issue as to whether or not this will be an opportunity that will be seized by the nation, or if it is just going to be another one where 10 years, 20 years down the road, we'll be saying that we missed that opportunity that was given to us by COVID-19. But before we get back to that, are you in any way concerned about the loss of basically what would have been either the first term or the end of the previous academic year? Because as we heard from the Prime Minister speaking on Saturday, essentially there will be no schooling, at least in the school environment, at least to the end of the year, and we don't know what's going to happen next because COVID-19, the cases are rising and so on. What is your perspective on the fact that the schools essentially are going to remain closed at least until the end of the year?
Education institutions would remain closed. It does not necessarily remain that the delivery of formal education or schooling, as we say, would be suspended. I would trust that the Minister of Education, whoever he or she is coming in, when they meet with their ministerial team, will look at the need for adjustment to what was originally proposed to obtain from September 1st. What was originally proposed for Zero was a blended learning approach, a hybrid model, where you would have students rotating some days face-to-face with the teachers and some days engaging in the virtual environment. What we need to do now is rethink that approach. There are a number of different models for using or conducting online teaching. We as stakeholders and the Ministry of Education, we have to determine which model or models best fit our students in the different locations and at the different levels. Once we've done that, then we would be able to determine what kind of curriculum, to the extent to which we can maintain the curriculum as it is, or the extent to which we have to make adjustments to the curriculum. We would then be able to determine how we would deal with assessment of students at the end of the term and going forward. And so the tools that we would use to deliver the curriculum in this new paradigm is something else that would come into play. So these things must be thought out. There must be proper planning and systematic delivery of these particular policies and initiatives to ensure that formal education continues, even though we may not be in the physical spaces.
Do you believe that is going to happen?
Well, for Zero, once there's life, there's hope. And once there's hope, there's a will to do and a way to get everything done. It requires quite a bit of political will to deal with this matter. It also requires cooperation from stakeholders, but not just the NCPTA or not just principals or tutor. Corporate Trinidad and Tobago may very well have a significant part to play, because if we are moving towards full-scale online engagement, right? Whether it's 3 days a week or 2 days a week, whatever is the model we eventually use, then it means, for example, there would be need to have students with devices. And so whilst the government will make the efforts to provide, this is something that corporate Trinidad and Tobago can become involved in to lend support to the national cause and by extension to national development. We talk many things. Policy development is a big thing. Policy implementation and how it happens is usually one of our challenges. But I think with the right guidance from the administration of the Ministry of Education and the right levels of support, we can achieve those outcomes in the short and medium term.
You say, Ms. DeFreitas, once there's life, there's hope. But we also rely on evidence. As human beings, we are supposed to go by what we've seen before. And the evidence of the way we do things, not just in this last administration or the last 10 years, but certainly most people's lifetimes, is that we talk, and don't implement nothing. Nothing in the real sense, because I'm sure many people say, no, we've implemented this, we've implemented that, we've implemented the other. What difference has it made to the quality and the nature and the relevance of our education? So forgive me for sounding the perennial cynic, but the thing is, how confident are you that we actually will grasp this opportunity to really bring about the transformation that is so very necessary?
Fazir, I understand this cynicism, and sometimes it's difficult to not look at things in that regard. But I'll tell you something, my personal perspective is once you have persons who are willing to drive certain processes and actions forward, they will get done. Once they are willing to engage in proper planning, and this is why I went back to that. In the past, we have rolled out initiatives within the education system. There may have been some level of research done locally. There may have been quite amount of research from foreign sources. But our implementation has never really taken into consideration, one, the teachers in the classroom and how the initiatives would be impacted by them or how they can participate in the initiatives, and two, the resources available to us. So we have these lofty ideals, but we have limited resources to carry out the initiatives. We must look at our real case scenarios for zero, at what is available in our primary or secondary or ECC schools, our tertiary institutions. We must look at what the structures are like to facilitate the initiatives. And this is where the planning, this is something I'm stressing, this is where the planning comes in, and you plan down to the most minute detail before you seek to implement. We should not, as we have had in the past, be implementing education initiatives and reforms, and then halfway down the road, as would happen with the CSE, for example, recognize there are more challenges than anything else. We must be data-driven, we must be research-driven, we must have the necessary resources and the necessary training where necessary. Planning must factor in all of these situations. I am confident, Fazir, that if the government is serious about implementing their Vision 2030 National Development Strategy, and we are interested in continuing formal education with providing equity and equality for all students, they will put whatever is necessary in place for us to do that.
As we mentioned earlier, the Express is speculating that Dr. Nyan Gadsby-Dolly will be the new Minister of Education, replacing Anthony Garcia. If it is her or anybody else who is appointed, what would you like to see from that minister?
Well, before I get to that point, Ttuta would like to thank Mr. Garcia for his service to the public and to the country as Minister of Education, and we wish him well in the future. Going forward, the new Minister of Education must have a level head. The new Minister of Education should not come in there with a level of high-handedness and arrogance. Neither should he or she be condescending. There requires at this time a level of objectivity and critical thinking to be able to assess the situations in front of us and chart the appropriate way forward. Communication, proper communication is a must, as well as the ability to think strategically. Running the ministry, operating a ministry successfully would also be an asset. But most of all, we think the new minister should really be a people person, because at the end of the day, education is a social process. It's about people of different age groups. So being able to relate to people of different age groups, either as stakeholders or at the level of the students, is a critical skill that we think the new minister should possess as well.
Can it be assumed by inference that Mr. Garcia was high-handed, condescending, and not a people person?
We all have our moments like that, Fazir, given the circumstances.
Very, very well done. Very, very diplomatically put, Ms. De Freitas. But the bigger issue certainly is, and just as an example in our discussion about education, it was obvious that Mr. Garcia didn't want the Concordat removed. It was obvious that the way there are many people in Trinidad and Tobago who hold fast to this Concordat thing, as if it is that we remove it, the whole country would collapse because it's held the fabric of our society together and so on. Is this the time to really think about those what we consider fundamental elements, like the Columbus statue, where people talk about this and talk about that, and every time you mention removing the Columbus statue, people start to go quiet because they don't want it removed. I don't know why. But getting back to the education system, do you believe things like the Concordat, which have cast in stone certain ways like the SEA and common entrance and so on, the shift system in our secondary school system, which was introduced in the 70s, which studies show to be a complete failure in that regard? Are we really ready to deal with those issues rather than just have another conference to waste time for 3 days?
Fazir, we must be strategic and prioritize what we are going to address in the short, medium, and long term. And yes, there may very well need to be discussion on the Concordat, as we have had in the past. But what we have to look at in the first instance would be the alternative, as I mentioned, to placement of the students, the transitioning of the students from the primary to the secondary school. But with that comes the issue of perception of persons, what school is a good school or what school is not a good school, to use layman terms. With that comes the need to change some of those perceptions, the need to ensure that all of our schools are properly resourced to allow each secondary school throughout Trinidad and Tobago to provide students with the equal chance, similar experiences for secondary education and for success at that level. So it's not simply a matter of talking about removal of the Concordat. Again, there must be planning to deal with the soft issues as well as the hard infrastructural and policy issues that would arise from such a measure.
I hear you on that. Sorry for interrupting you, Ms. De Freitas. I know the point that you're making, and I know you are someone very much in the system, and you know how things work. I get you with that. But the point I'm trying to make is that I don't get the sense that people are even really interested in even entertaining the thought of removing the Concordat. The reason I say that is that because I get the point that you're making about putting systems in place, but to even get to that, you have to either, the decision makers, whoever the minister will be, whoever, whatever, to get to the point of recognizing that, is it really benefiting our students in Trinidad and Tobago in 2020 to have something where religious organizations are given this preferential accommodation of 20% or whatever? I don't get the sense that people are even prepared to have that as a decision to be made. They rather leave it for somebody else to deal with in 50 years' time.
Because of the issue of political will, because of the lack of data, perhaps, in terms of scientific data, in terms of whether it has really, as you said, been beneficial, because of perceptions that we have. Who is willing to bell the cat in that regard?
Well, what is the point of leader? This is my point, right? Ms. De Freitas.
That's the question that has to be asked. But you see, at the end of the day, in this heterogeneous society that we have, I suppose policymakers and the stakeholders everybody will vie for their piece of the pie. What we have to look at, Fazir, is not what is beneficial to the adults. We have to look at it in the context of how does it benefit the students. And this is where I talk about the need to become data-driven and research-driven in that regard. We have not had any significant national project yet, research project yet, on whether or not the Concordat is, as you said, beneficial. Maybe that is something that needs to happen to guide the policymakers. But at the end of the day, should that really and truly be a priority when we have the other issues to address in education? And that's what the state will have to determine. That's what stakeholders will have to offer comments on.
And before we conclude, and I get your point about the importance of prioritizing and not just simply targeting certain obvious issues and feeling that you've solved it, but in the little time that we have left, we have just about 90 seconds left, and we thank you as always for making yourself available. If there were to be, if we talk about a list of priorities, what to you would be the number one priority as far as recalibrating education? If I were to use the headline of the Ttuta piece yesterday in the Newsday, what to you would be the number one priority?
Understanding that as a nation, first year, we have to move away from simply teaching the curriculum to prepare students for exams and move towards teaching the children and meeting their individual needs and looking at their relative levels of success.
Antonia de Freitas, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. Thanks very much, as always, for taking the time to speak with us on this Wednesday morning. We do
Thank you for having me. Do have a blessed day.
You have a good day as well, and thanks as well for that history lesson not so long ago, telling us about Indian walk in Moruga and why it was called Indian walk. Well, as we head to the break, we have something